Hello, and welcome to the John R. Kirk Planetarium. My name is David Meir, and today I want to talk about snakes. Over 50% of Americans report that they have a fear of snakes. And you know what? That kind of makes sense. They're slithery, they're a little creepy, they're crawly, they're poisonous. So it would make sense that we've been afraid of snakes for a long time. Those snakes have even made their way not only into popular culture, but into ancient culture as well. And when ancient cultures want to talk about something, they put it in the stars. So I want to talk about snakes in the stars, as well as all sorts of interesting things. And lastly, I'm going to end with something else that we're very afraid of, but maybe we shouldn't be. Asteroid impacts. Let's go.
We're at the walkway over the Hudson, and we can see a bunch of different useful bits of information already. Firstly, in order to get a sense of our bearings, we can look at cardinal points. The Hudson flows down south, and the walkway itself goes from east to west. There's a couple of different objects in the sky, but it's dominated by the sun. And of course, when the sun is up, we can't see much else. So let's let the sun set. Now, since we are in the spring and past the vernal equinox, we're going to be getting more hours of daylight than nighttime. In addition, the sun is done setting in the south, and now it's going to be setting ever so slightly north of west. So when the sun goes down, the stars will come up. Now the night sky is lit up with stars, and I want to point us towards some of the most famous. At the moment, we're looking basically northwest, but if we want to see other stars, we need to be looking north, and from there we can see the most famous constellation comprised of 7 stars, the Big Dipper. So, firstly, the Big Dipper is at the moment very far north in the sky and very high up. So we're going to have 7 stars. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. And all of those put together create a big handle and shovel. But I actually just told you 2 lies. Firstly, the Big Dipper is not a constellation in and of itself. There's more to it. So the Big Dipper is actually part of Ursa Major. That is a great big bear. This handle of the shovel can also be thought of as the tail of a bear. You've got one paw that goes down here, a belly, and another paw that comes up here. You've got a big nose and a snout, and a back like that. All of that put together gives us Ursa Major. Now, the second lie I told you I think is a lot more interesting. The Big Dipper is not only comprised of 7 stars. There's actually a whole lot to unpack. So, when we take a closer look at this one right here, named Mizar, we'll find something pretty cool. So, we're zooming in a bit, and then we find this bright star over here. This is Alcor. So, we have already discovered one thing. This constellation has at least another star in it, Alcor. In fact, if your eyes are really, really good, you can see them separate with your own eyes. But if you put a telescope up, it's pretty obvious what's going on. This represents a binary system, 2 stars orbiting around each other. Most of these stars that you can see around here are not actually gravitationally bound to each other, but Mizar and Alcor actually are because they're very close. So let's take a closer look at Mizar though, and we'll see that it splits again. So Mizar is a double. So we have a double-double. We have Mizar in its own kind of 2 stars, and then Alcor further out going around it as well. In fact, this is actually a quadruple star system. Alcor has two of its own as well. So from there, we can determine a lot and see that there's really a lot going on even just in one single star. Besides me lying to you, there's still lots of interesting things to think about within the Big Dipper, though. Firstly, it's really useful as a navigational tool because it can help you find lots of other constellations. The first one I want to show you is the Big Dipper's kind of friend, or you could say twin or child. If you take these two stars right here and you follow them in a straight line, you'll get to this star right here. This star is special because it is Polaris, and it will help you find the Little Dipper. So you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and Polaris itself, 7, brings you that Little Dipper. And with the Little Dipper, there's a bear associated with it. Ursa Major is the Big Dipper, and Ursa Minor is the Little Dipper. A very unique thing about the Little Dipper is that it is always visible to us in the Northern Hemisphere. This won't be the case with other constellations we look at, but all the stars are rising in the east and setting in the west, except for the pole star, Polaris. So, there's a couple of other stars that instead of rising in the east or setting in the west, they orbit around Polaris. Let's take a look at that. They're going around Polaris, and these stars down here, they're kind of sweeping out an arc. So instead of setting, they're doing that. Here, let's go backwards. You can see that again, but in reverse. So there are some stars that never set. And this is based on your latitude. If you were in the literal North Pole, then every single star would not set. And if you were at the literal equator, every single star would set. So it actually changes what constellations you can see and how circumpolar they are, how often you can see them based on your latitude. And some of the ones we're going to be looking at for the rest of the night do have that latitude dependency. So, the first one I want to point out that's related to those snakes is found by using the Big Dipper again. We follow it this way to find Polaris, but if you follow it the other way, you eventually get all the way up and very high. We get this backwards question mark here, and this is the constellation of Leo. You have a huge lion's mane. This is the mane itself. You have a body down here with this rectangle and a little tail or foot in back. There you go. That is Leo. And a bunch of these have Greek mythological origins. Leo can represent a Nemean lion. Now, that Nemean lion is very special. It has impenetrable hide, and you really can't attack it with a sword. The sword's just going to snap. So, who could defeat such a mean beast? Why, then none other than Hercules. Now, Hercules, of course, is a Greek hero who had to perform 12 labors in order to avenge the murder of his family. So, he had these impossible, basically, tasks, and those tasks really pushed him to his limit, and they often involved monsters. Now, there was no bigger monster than the Hydra, which is the first snake that I want to talk to you about. So, in order to find Hydra, we need to use Leo and Leo's head. So, the mane, as I said, forms kind of a question mark shape. And then from there, you can actually follow it over to this head right here. From there, you have a very long body. It starts over here and snakes down and up and around and in all different types of directions. This is Hydra. Now, Hydra is the largest constellation in the sky, and it's representative of an even more dangerous beast. So, the Hydra was, imagine a snake, but it was huge and it breathed fire, kind of like a dragon. The problem is, when you chop a head off the Hydra, it doesn't die. Two more grow back in its place. Start that with three heads as well, and it's really, really difficult to actually kill a Hydra. Now, Hercules, with his super strength and intelligence, was tasked to destroy it. The way he did it was with the help of his nephew. As Hercules battled the beast, his nephew torched each spot that Hercules cut. So he would cut off a head and his nephew would torch it. That way, new heads could not grow back. From there, he managed to defeat it in one of his most impressive battles yet. Now, the constellation Hydra also has a ton of what's called deep space objects in it. So if I pull up these borders, anything that's within these borders, say, is part of Hydra. And same as that, anything that's within the borders of Leo over here is considered to be within the constellation of Leo. And from there, you can get the Pinwheel Galaxy. Now, the Pinwheel Galaxy is awesome, so I want to take a break and talk a little bit about it.
I want to tell you a bit about the actual Pinwheel Galaxy. Firstly, there's a different one, but this is, you can think of it as the Northern Pinwheel Galaxy. We call the one I was pointing out the Southern Pinwheel Galaxy. Now, this is a grand design galaxy. So, that's a fancy way of saying it has really cool spiral arms. Those spiral arms are actually waves of stars. Gas and dust will collect there, produce a bunch of blue stars, and by the time those stars would have traveled away, they will actually have blown up, basically. So, only the blue bright stars are in the spiral, and the red fainter stars are more evenly dispersed. But that gives us that design. Another feature is those kind of brown gray bands that go around. Those are dust that's kind of absorbing light, so it can't get to us quite as easily. That's kind of what's going on. There's no actual grand design, someone puppeteering these to all look like a spiral. It's all just physics. It's like a traffic jam at those spirals, and they continue after those spirals a good bit quicker.
Hydra actually shows up in another constellation as well. As we mentioned, both of these creatures were destroyed by Hercules, and Hercules himself has also, of course, earned his way into the sky. But in order to see that, we need to go first back north and then a little later into the night. So it's about 8 o'clock, 8:30, something like that. We're going to go to about 10 p.m. And then a bunch of different stars are going to start becoming visible. In order to see it, looks like we went quite far. That's okay. We'll definitely be able to see him now. The Big Dipper, all the way up here, can point us to this bright star. There's also another bright star in the vicinity all the way over here. You draw a straight line between these two stars, named Arcturus and Vega, you will actually find this rectangle. That rectangle is the body of Hercules. He's got all sorts of limbs that spring out on either side, and you can see him here wrestling the Hydra, or at least three heads of the Hydra. Hercules deserves his own show and his own segment, and a lot of people have done that. I want to focus on a specific interesting object within the constellation of Hercules. So there's a star, Hercules 14, the 14th brightest star in Hercules. It's not that interesting, but it has a planet that is quite interesting. In our solar system, the biggest planet is Jupiter. And in 14 Hercules, the biggest planet is called 14 Hercules b, the second planet away from its star. This planet is 11 times the mass of Jupiter. This is closer to a brown dwarf, an artist's depiction shown here. Now, a brown dwarf is something in between a planet and a star. Really, the only thing that's stopping any of our planets in our solar system from turning into stars is mass. If they had enough mass, mostly of hydrogen and helium, because that's what's out there in the universe, they would eventually start their own nuclear fusion. Now, Jupiter, some people think it could have been maybe a failed brown dwarf, but 14 Hercules b is almost definitely a brown dwarf, or if it's not, it's really towing the line. It's something strange in between, where it's giving off a lot of heat for sure, but nowhere near the amount of heat as a star. It's nowhere near as massive as a star, but also way heavier than any of the planets. It's really its own mystery, which to me makes it really, really interesting. I love studying these kind of in betweens. Now, we've been in the northern sky, so let's go back to Polaris. Let's go back to that North Star. Of course, even though the night has progressed, Polaris is still going to be at the North Pole. And in fact, here in Poughkeepsie and in New Paltz, we are about 42 degrees above the equator. And actually, this distance right here is also 42 degrees. That is not a coincidence. Now, there's another snake or snake-like thing hiding around Ursa Major. We often think of snakes and reptiles and lizards very similarly to dragons. And in fact, in a lot of cultures, they're one and the same. What we call a dragon, the Chinese may call a serpent or vice versa. And there's all sorts of interesting mythology. So it would make sense that there is another dragon in the sky. So between the Big and Little Dippers, we have some constellations that kind of hook up like this. We've got kind of a curve shape like that. And then a head up here. That head shape is the head of Draco. Draco is one of the oldest constellations in the night sky. Draco has been described by the Mesopotamians, by the Egyptians, of course by the Greeks, and other cultures show similar things. It's very easy to see kind of a string of stars in the sky. And Draco, in fact, used to be even more important. One of the primary reasons Draco was once even more important was because of the Earth's precession. As we know, the Earth spins, but it also wobbles a bit like a top. That means the North Pole will constantly be cycling around, but this happens very, very slowly. This happens over the course of tens of thousands of years or more. And what that means for us and astronomers is that the North Star is not always fixed at north. Polaris just happens to be very close to due north and a relatively bright star. But that was not always the case. Draco used to contain the North Pole, and Thuban, specifically this star right here, used to be the closest star to the North Pole. This was even such that ancient Egyptians would actually build their pyramids pointing towards not the North Star and the North Celestial Pole, but towards Thuban and where Thuban was. As I said, Thuban was not exactly at the North Pole, but it was the closest bright star there was to the North Pole. Egyptians built it, and it was even recognized to the Greeks as well, or it was recognized by putting it in Draco. Now, the story of Draco is actually fairly interesting itself. Draco is, of course, a dragon. And the Greek idea of a dragon is really kind of where the idea of serpent and dragon begin to split. This dragon had wings and it had legs, a bit more like a lizard. In other mythologies, they're much more snake-like, and some are even aquatic. But this dragon was named Ladon, and it actually also began the idea that dragons are guarding something or hoarding something. This time, Ladon was guarding a pile of golden apples, or a tree of golden apples, I should say. These golden apples actually let whoever ate them achieve immortality. So you would assume that, of course, they would be pretty heavily guarded. Now, Hercules was the one who actually stole an apple, not by killing the dragon, but by sneaking around, distracting him, so he couldn't even fight it himself. Hercules is not the only man who fought snakes, though, or snake like creatures. I want to quickly go to the northwestern sky. It's a little low now by the time we've gotten to 11 o'clock, but if you come out a little earlier, you can actually see kind of a star-shaped constellation like this. This guy right here is Perseus, and Perseus has a head down here, and that is the head of a Gorgon. So a Gorgon is, or otherwise known as Medusa, is a lady with snake hair. Instead of having normal strands of hair, she has snakes. So snakes are really seen as evil in a lot of circumstances. They're also known for one very special thing, which is a caduceus and medicine. They have some relation there. So I want to focus on that for a little bit. I think they're kind of not getting their fair share. So I already pointed out Leo. He's kind of in the southern sky at the moment, but there's other ones as well, not just Leo that you probably recognize the name of. So right here we have Virgo. That's definitely a name you guys probably recognize. We've got Leo over there, and Cancer, we have the zodiacs. So, how many zodiacs are there? Most people think of 12, one for each month. And a zodiac is defined as any constellation which lies on this ecliptic. It's quite an interesting thing, but what I want to do is go forward in time and see what else lies on the ecliptic. So let's go forward and just keep seeing the ones that are coming. Libra and Scorpius, that sounds about right. We're getting really early in the morning as well. So these are not going to be visible for kind of until the summer, or if you're really, really brave and if you come out soon, you might be able to see them. What I want to focus on now is this guy, Serpens. He may not look like he's in the zodiac, but his friend, Ophiuchus, sure is. Ophiuchus is often called the 13th zodiac, basically because it makes so much more sense to have one zodiac for each month. People just kind of ignore Ophiuchus, and normally Scorpius gets pushed into that same place. But Ophiuchus was just as important to the Greeks, and kind of related to that, he has his own rich history. Ophiuchus was two different things, a snake charmer and a doctor. So, Ophiuchus was not always called that. I believe that's the Latinized name. The name Asclepius or Asclepius is the more Greek name. He learned about the secret of keeping death at bay because they observed a serpent healing another serpent with herbs. That was the beginning of medicine. Asclepius became very, very good with medicine, so much so that people stopped dying. The Greek gods were not happy with this, especially Hades, the god of the underworld. They wanted humans to live mortal lives. So, they weren't about to punish Asclepius for being so brilliant, though, so they honored him by putting him in the stars. Now, Serpens, the snake that's twisted around him, is cool for his own reasons. Firstly, no other constellation is broken into two bits. But if I bring up these borders, you can see right over here we have Serpens, and right over here we have Serpens. No other constellation is broken up like that. Serpens in particular was interesting because in a couple of scenarios, it was actually played as a trick to save humans. Hermes wanted an offering of blood, and he asked a crow for it. But the crow refused and instead filled up a cup with a serpent. The serpent attacked Hermes, and the crow thought it was a really good joke. Hermes didn't think so much, and so punished the crow. Now, the serpent didn't do anything wrong. The combination of Ophiuchus and serpents also coming together in the caduceus, two snakes wrapped around the head of a big staff. This is one of the oldest and most famous symbols of medicine. And in a lot of ways, a lot of doctors and other people kind of relate to this image. Serpents are not only things of destruction, not even most snakes are venomous. A lot of them can't even hurt you. They're more afraid of big, strong, scary humans than we are of them. Now, that's not to say that you should just invalidate your fear of them. There's some good reasons. But we are also scared of other things. I want to close out the night by talking about something we are all scared about: the end of the world. And it begins with the god of death in Egyptian, a creature or a god with a snake head named Apophis. The Apophis asteroid came close to Earth on March 6th. You probably didn't hear much about it. It came pretty close, it wasn't too scary. But it's going to be coming back again. And in the future, there's a whole lot of uncertainty as to what's happening. Firstly, what are the stats? So, Apophis is a near Earth asteroid. So it's going to get close to the Earth in its orbit. It's not always close. It's not like the moon, but it'll get close in and then sweep far out. The closest it gets on average is about 30,000 kilometers away from us. On the astronomical scale, that's nothing. It is kind of spherical, with a kind of diameter, a little under 400 meters. It's extremely massive, though, as well the density of pure rock. So, firstly, let's clarify a couple terms. Asteroid and comet are kind of the most generic. Very rarely will those two be wrong. If it's out in space, it could have a couple of different names, but if it's on the ground down here, we call it like we call any other rock or mineral. We give it an ite, so meteorite. Now, meteoroid is kind of another generic term that's applicable in most situations. It is a meteor exactly when it's entering the atmosphere and begins to heat up. We see a streak, and that streak of light, like in a meteor shower, is a meteor itself. So, what happened? Well, we first detected Apophis in 2004. There was a 3% chance it would hit Earth in 2029. That was our prediction back then. 2006, that had changed. It was less likely to impact in 2029, but in 2036, it could. There's a certain keyhole, an area that if it passed through, that area would guarantee that the next time it swung around, it would hit. That was 800 meters in 2006. By 2008, that zone had shrunk to almost nothing. Now, Apophis got pretty close to us on March 6th. Now, it wasn't close enough to make the news, but it was there. And it will be back in 2029. There's a small risk of it hitting us, but there's really not much reason to worry. Firstly, if it did, an asteroid twice as big, so that has even more than twice as much kinetic energy, would be massive but local damage. Think something like the one in Russia in 2014. Think about like twice that. Now, I would not want to be near that asteroid when it hit us, but it wouldn't cause catastrophic dinosaur ending things. Now, it has also never had more than a 1% chance of impact. How careful should we be, though? I'm not sure. That's for you, us, politicians, and scientists to decide. One thing that was kind of published recently about it, they got a better idea of this thing called Yarkovsky effect and the Yarkovsky push. So, we don't know exactly which way Apophis is spinning. And depending on whether it's spinning, this chart shows a really good example. The sun is going to heat it up, and then it's going to get a little bit of heat very close to the sun, and then it's going to radiate that heat away. And that heat, when it radiates, can either push the asteroid or slow it down. And depending on how that goes, it can really change the dynamics, how it's going to actually uh, change in, decades or, a couple years. We need really good measurements, and we don't have that. So while we do have good guesses, we can't be exactly sure of what's happening. So what's likely to happen though? We're going to have pretty close, they're probably going to make the news, flybys in 2029 and in 2036. Apophis will be visible in the night sky brighter than some of the stars we looked at in our show today. It's going to be magnitude 3, where the brightest stars you can see are about a magnitude 0 or -1, and the faintest stars you can see are about a 5 or a 6. So it's going to be faint, but not super faint. You'll be able to see it. It's a very tiny chance of impact that we think, or the best chance of all these dates is in 2068, but that's also not very likely. In general, the threat of asteroids are really overblown. There's things we should be worried about. Climate change is inevitable. War, especially nuclear war, can really screw us up. And like antibiotic resistant diseases, we don't really have to be worried about this as long as we keep our eyes open and keep on the lookout. Here are some of the sources I used. You can use these to look up your own information and stay informed in your own ways. There's lots of good information as long as you know the right websites to go to.
Thank you guys for coming to this planetarium show with me. I hope you had a good time. If you have any questions, you can email me. My email will be in the description. And I hope you guys have a good day. Stay curious and keep looking up to the sky. The constellations I pointed out should be available all season.